Welcome back. Now, barely a month after Cyclone Idai devastated Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Malawi, another one has hit Mozambique. At the same time, Kwazulu-Natal is dealing with the effects of its worst flooding in years. Now, the floods took more than 70 lives. So what would be the best approach, especially for the Sarek region, to deal with this kind of natural disaster? I'm joined via Skype by Dr. Chris Nshimbi from the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation at the University of Pretoria to answer some of these questions. Dr. Chris, thanks a lot for joining us on Newsnight this evening. You know what is disconcerting is the fact that the United Nations actually, and it was the Secretary General that appealed for help and outlined a plan to respond to the disaster at a Security Council stakeout. I mean, obviously looking at what's happening in the Sarek region in itself. What's disconcerting is that the Sarek remained quite silent. Why is that?
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's quite unbelievable, and it's difficult to understand why the SADC remained quiet or silent. Actually, would have expected them to take the lead in attending to the disaster and also assisting the countries, but they can best explain why they remained quiet.
One would say that is SADC capacitated enough? And the reason why I'm asking is because they've got a dedicated disaster risk reduction unit that is specifically dedicated to look at coordinating responses via natural disasters as well as hazards, right, of any form of or sense. But is it effective enough? Is it capacitated enough? I mean, or is SADC just too far removed? To know that Angola, Botswana, Tanzania and Zambia are just about the only countries that contributed to relief efforts after Cyclone Idai. Now we've got Kenneth hits. That says something about the capacity of SADC.
It does indeed. And actually, the fact that you mentioned that individual countries are the ones that contributed instead of the regional organization says a lot with respect to its capacity and ability to assist. But my proposal still is that SADC should be the lead organization that should assist countries in the region, and even the countries that contributed should seek to make their contributions through the regional organization. It's more or less a question of pulling resources together, and in that way you can have synergistic approach to dealing with disasters of the magnitude that we saw in Mozambique last week.
Is it a question of resources, Doctor, or is it a question of countries wanting to maintain their sovereignty and countries wanting to maintain their autonomy? So belonging to a body such as SADC will mean certain compromises when it comes to certain policies administered in those countries, so therefore not a lot of effort being put into the workings of the SADC countries as well as their instrument, as opposed to more issues around resources. In other words, do these SADC countries actually want to be part of SADC?
They wouldn't want to surrender their sovereignties, unfortunately, and so that also explains a lot with regard to its inability to lead the efforts. So the countries are unwilling to surrender part of their policies to this regional organization. So some people actually refer to SADC as an intergovernmental organization and not a regional organization, because countries are unwilling to surrender some of that power. But even on the issue of capacity, if the countries were just at least, my suggestion is that if they have a regional fund, then they would be able to use or utilize funds from such a fund to assist countries that are affected by disasters. But then, to answer your question, there's limited capacity, of course, but also the countries are quite unwilling to surrender some of the policy authority and policy to the regional organization to spearhead initiatives that are needed to deal with such disasters.
You know what's disheartening, Doctor, is the fact that we're having this conversation about SADC countries, which I'm sure if they put their budgets together, they're able to provide that $2 billion US relief effort that is actually needed to mitigate the disasters that were experienced instead of the $500,000 US that they actually pledged in relief efforts. But what is disheartening is the fact that we're continuously looking to the West for any form of assistance when literally we're supposed to be having a conversation around African solutions to African problems. But it looks as though Africans themselves are struggling to come together, and even on the basis of providing relief to their fellow African man. That says something about us.
It does indeed. And actually, the indictment comes from, if you look at organizations like Gift of the Givers, an NGO is able to pull its act together more than countries. It's a small NGO within a country, but it's able to deal with such disasters, at least to give relief efforts. And it even goes beyond the region in terms of providing assistance. I think they can take a leaf from that and be able to actually come up with something concrete that would enable them to assist other countries, neighboring countries, and enhance the integration of the region and the continent.
So then would you say that when it comes to the African context, and look, this is quite a disturbing conversation that you and I are having around Africans being unable to get themselves together to solve African problems. So you're saying that perhaps a more bilateral approach to relationships and governance, it works much better than as opposed to a solid instrument or institution that is there where policies need to be put together, where countries need and statesmen need to work together for the purpose of the greater good of the region. So you're saying, except for regional policies, it looks like more bilaterally linked relationships prove to be more effective in the African context.
Actually, that's the problem. The problem is that they prefer to go bilateral than to work as a group. And that's what undermines the efforts of regional organizations to actually be effective in implementing some of the regional policies. So countries prefer to deal with one another on a bilateral level. And because of that, there's a reluctance for them to deal together as one region or as a continent as a whole.
But then what's the solution? We're talking about the problems here, but what is the solution? Is the solution to re-look at who's leading these various SADC countries? Because every single SADC country has got a leader. Do we need to re-look at the leaders? Do we need to re-look at the framework of SADC as well as the effectiveness of SADC? Do we need to re-look at ourselves and introspect as Africans and say, maybe there's something wrong with us as Africans if we are failing to work together as a continent for the relief of another country within the African continent itself? What is the problem? How do we solve this?
I think SADC needs some serious introspection and actually maybe some serious restructuring. If you go back to history, you find that at the time SADC was a coordinating committee before 1992, it was actually quite more effective in dealing with some of the challenges that were facing the region. You can look at the example of apartheid and also just developmental projects that they were running at the time. They were very effective. But when they changed their treaty and they changed their orientation to markets in 1992, something seems to have gone wrong. So that even with other issues like socio-economic issues, they seem to be less effective in dealing with them. So I think they need some introspection. But I would propose that they should work together as a region, pull resources together. That would be more effective. I mean, it's a question of 1 + 1 = 3. So using synergies as a region to deal with problems that are cross-border, problems that do not respect borders, problems that are beyond the capacity of one state to deal with.
When you had the South Africa's Foreign Affairs Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, who said that when it came to the regional body in itself, it was completely unprepared for the natural disasters that we've just experienced. And unfortunately for the people of Mozambique, we've got Kenneth that has made a landfall there where the cyclone is concerned. And we're dealing with issues around flooding, etc. You would think that we'd put together as a SADC region and actually come to each other's aid. In that sense, is it because we are still dealing with, and I'm very careful to say this, but are we still dealing with a colonial mindset when it comes to the way in which we as Africans approach each other? What is it that we're failing to come to each other's aids as Africans? Is it still because at the back of our heads, in our repressive memory, we still have a colonial mindset to the way in which we handle issues on this continent?
That hits the nail on the head, actually. And actually, if you look at even the policies that drive or govern how we're supposed to respond to some of these challenges, you still find that most of them were formulated during colonial era. Very few of them have been revised to suit the current times and to respond to challenges that are emerging. So that mindset has to be changed, and then we have to learn that it's only by working together. I mean, we did overcome colonialism. At least we did manage to gain political independence because we worked together. But past that, we seem to have gone back to each one his own way or her own way, and then forgotten that in numbers we can actually achieve more than we can do individually.